we go. We're preparing to go to the internet. Which is so funny. I'm like, oh, I have Uranus in Sag in the 4th house. I'm like, literally was built to work on the internet from home. Which I think is a whole hoot. All right. Hi, everybody. Welcome to your class today. Sorry, we're getting started just a little bit late, but I am thrilled because we've just had an opportunity to kind of pause a little bit in our content from planets, history, houses, signs, and detour a little and get into the medical portion. And so we had Kira Sutherland work us and start walking us in there. And now Cameron Allen is here and just the herbs and all the Cameron. And I'm so thrilled for your class today. So Cameron, welcome. Welcome to the school.
Hey, thanks for having me. Yeah, I'm excited too. I'm really to see how people tune into this talk, because it's really an exploratory look at the houses and how to like interact with plants in a very, I feel like it's a unique, I've never seen a talk like this. So I'm excited to see how people are receiving it.
Absolutely. Well, I can only imagine that it's going to be phenomenal. Every single one of our students, I will tell you, so far since the academy has been started, has shown up in genuine gratitude. And so whatever happens here today, I just have a sense that it's going to be very, very, very good. So I will turn it over to you, and you guys enjoy your class today. Bye, everybody.
Awesome. Okay. Welcome, everybody. Okay, awesome. Oh, here we are. Sometimes my computer's acting slow. Okay, so welcome everybody. Today we're going to be talking about places and plants. So we're going to be talking about the house systems, like the house system of astrology, and how we can orient our life and work with the houses in a way that essentially it's like putting either an herb, a specific herb, or a type of herb into every single house in your chart, right? And this, to me, this is an exploration that isn't necessarily like grounded and rooted in like some traditional technique. It's just a way to bring astrology into our lives in a way that is experiential, that allows us to tap into the essence of what is holistic health based off of the tool that we all here love, astrology. So yeah, and also my name is Cameron. I've been practicing herbalism for at least 5 years now. I've been practicing astrology for at least 5 years now. And when I first began, it was literally just the plants and planets and the people here in Memphis, Tennessee, where I live at, and just being in the back of an herb room and everything being based off of experience has given me a really unique way that I look at astrology. So I'm excited to share with everybody today. So to begin with, if you desire to, pause and take a read. This is just a disclaimer saying that go to your primary healthcare physician and go to a licensed professional before you do anything, essentially, right? It's like, just be mindful of that. And we're going to talk a little bit more about discernment too as well. Also, if you're not watching this live right now, open invitation to take a pause and go get some tea or go get some water or put on something more comfortable so you can be in your body and be present. So discernment with herbs and ability to respond to health. I want to talk about that first because I feel like when it comes to herbs, a lot of times people have like a lot of caution, and we should have caution when we're working with herbs. And also sometimes I have the felt sense that, I feel like sometimes it's like we literally just don't trust nature anymore. And I feel like it's really important to have discernment on both sides, right? Like having caution and also not going to the extent where you're looking up the side effects of peppermint and chamomile for 50 minutes because we have like fear around drinking just like, just the most simple teas. So just open invitation to think about that whenever you're interacting with plants. And then also your responsibility to your own health. So whenever you hear somebody say anything on the internet, if they're not a licensed professional, just be mindful that you're still in responsibility for your own health, and we should ingest those things and then go do more research ourselves, right? I feel like a lot of times we give so many disclaimers these days, and disclaimers are good. And also, I think that it would be amazing for us to continue to cultivate, like right what I say right here, healthful decision making, right? Like not relying on other people necessarily for our own health, because we're always going to be where we're at and other things might not always be there. So also when it comes to just holistic health and astrology in general, learning the basic layers of energetics is super important. So, and when I say energetics, what I'm really talking about oftentimes is just hot, cold, wet, dry, just those simple things, right? Which some people call the Humeros. And knowing it on a personal level. So how do I feel in my body? Am I a hot, wet, cold, or dry person? Your environment, right? What climate do you live in? And what season is it in? What kind of family did you grow up in, right? What culture are you in? Just even taking a step back and thinking about it right now, where are you from? What culture do you live in? And what energy would that be to you? Even just if it's intuitively feeling into it, would it be earth element? Would it be water? Would it be air? Would it be fire? Like knowing those things are really, really important when it comes to our health, because oftentimes we forget how much the environment influences us. So being adaptable in that way is really, really important. And also taking ancient wisdom and applying it in a modern way. So that can come up in a few ways, right? So one of the biggest things I think about when I'm thinking about herbs and reading books from the past, sometimes I will read passages that say stuff like, if you drink rosemary every day, then one will never have brain issues, or, one will think with delight all their lives, So it's like they say these things, and sometimes I think that they are like, they have a lot of truth in them, and also they get dramatized to make a point, right? Not to actually say every single person on the planet drink rosemary and it's going to be perfect for you. Not that. It's trying to make a point. So just being able to take things and use them in the context that we're in right now. So before we begin, I just want to give a shout out and also invite people to tune into other classes that have already been done in the YouTube Academy, so that they can connect it to this one and then all the rest of them as well. So since I'm gonna be talking about houses, Sam Reynolds did a talk over houses earlier in this month. And then SJ also did something over houses. So just if you feel like, because I'm not necessarily going to go in depth on just like the houses as a whole and like how it came to be and stuff like that. So open invitation to go back and look through their videos so the connections can continue to land. And also being mindful of just being present. And if you feel like something doesn't necessarily make sense, then just let it not make sense, in this present moment, because you can come back and watch the video again. We had these other great videos, and in that way, it'll be a more easeful experience and learning. And we won't have to like clench our face to focus to learn, and rather we can drop in and embody and feel into how this astrology can come alive for us. Also, Kira Sutherland did a talk earlier this week on medical interpretation. So that's another one to go check out along with this talk. So coming to the houses. When it comes to the houses a lot lately, I've been thinking of them as places and spaces. Because I work from a holistic frame, when I think of anything in astrology or anything in life for that matter, I always think about the internal reflection and the external reflection. So when it comes to houses, when I think of places, I think of like the place or the area in life, right? That's more like the external reflection of something. Like, where is that in my life? Is it here in my home? Is it out in the world, right? Is it at my job? So just thinking of that as places. And then spaces, I also look at the houses from a perspective of the psyche, right? So that's the space within consciousness, which is within me. So just being mindful of those two things. Sometimes I feel like people say one or the other, and that's like part of their practice, and that's totally fine. And also, I just want everybody to be mindful. They're together always, and they can never be separate, right? So this is more like the spaces right here. Well, this was the places, right? Opening a door and entering into the 10th house, or opening a door and entering into the 7th house. Well, here I'm entering into a space within my psyche, which is much more vast and unseen, and it's, yeah, it's just a different terrain. Something else I want to point out with houses and signs, a lot of times there's this thing that people talk about called the 12-letter alphabet. In evolutionary astrology, we call it the natural zodiac. They have similar themes to them, even though they're different. But essentially, these would be like the 12 houses right here, right? And as you see, the first house, right, it has a similarity of Aries, and it rules the head just like Aries. The second house does the same thing with Taurus. It rules the throat. The second house rules the throat, and so does Taurus. The same thing with Gemini, and then so on and so forth, all the way around the wheel. And what's really important to know about this is that signs come first. Signs are primary when it comes to your orientation of looking at the body. So just being mindful of that, even though the houses can be a reflection of that as well. So I just wanted to say that so people don't get confused about that. And also, that's probably something that comes later on with medical astrology, but I just wanted to point that out. And here's just right here is a reflection as well of how Aries rules the head and Taurus rules the throat, and how this is reflected in the houses just like it's reflected in the signs. So understanding patterns and correspondence. This has more to do with plant medicine than it does with the houses per se right now, but I just want to run through it real quick. So as far as to begin with, we always start with what in alchemy they call the prima materia, right? It's the one thing. So whatever that one thing is, it all depends. That one thing could be the universe, right? That one thing could be your astrological chart, or in this case, that one thing can be a plant, right? And always first come into the one thing, because we have to know the whole of something before we can break it apart and understand the parts. If we don't understand the parts, if we understand the parts by themselves and separate, we don't really understand them because they're only in context to the whole. So just being mindful of that. So with plants, these are fancy words right here, kind of, but not really fancy. They're just alchemical terms. This is called celestial salt, which you could think of that as like passive energy. And then this is celestial niter, as you could think of active energy or yang energy, and then yin energy. In alchemy, they call it fixed and volatile. So every plant is going to have that quality to it, right? Is it hot? Is it activating? Or is it cold? Is it cooling, right? And then those break off into the elements. So is something really earthy? Is it grounding? Is it bringing you down and in and making you feel really consolidated? Is it getting the energy moving as far as the waters of the body, right? The air element, is it working on the lungs and going up and out? And then fire, is it like stimulating you? So all these things are just something to be mindful of when you're thinking about plants. You know, oftentimes these days we think about them in an allopathic way where it's like, use this plant for that. And that can be okay sometimes. And also that's not really the way plants work. They can work that way, but understanding patterns in reality is really, really important. So, yeah. So the first thing when it comes to houses that I think about is a day chart versus a night chart, or just what is the nature of those two things. And to be able to distinguish if you have a day chart or a night chart, if the sun is above the horizon, then you have a day chart. If the sun is below the horizon, then you have a night chart. And the biggest thing to reflect on here is just an invitation for everybody to see also what other planets they have that are above the horizon, which would equate more to daytime. And then what's below the horizon, which would equate more to night. Because based off of those things, the metabolic force within your body will be modulated. So let's say I have like 7 planets below the horizon in the night chart, right? So since that happens, my metabolism has a tendency to being slower, right? And that just every single time one planet is above the horizon, is going to be more metabolic fire, right? So it's something that fluctuates, and it's not always just this one like, oh, I have a night chart, so my metabolism's slow, right? It's not that simple, even though I invite everybody to start there and then grow from that space. So also talking about plant energetics again, just talking about hot, cold, wet, and dry. So for the fire element, we have hot and dry. For the earth element, we have dry and cold. For the water element, we have wet and cold. And for the air element, we have hot and wet. So just feeling into those things and going looking up the Humeros or the 4 qualities, or even Carl Jung has 4 psychological types that you can look up, and just beginning to reflect these things in reality in and of itself. Also thinking about the seasons, what part of the day we're in, right? So even here, like the air element would represent like when we wake up in the morning, and then as we continue to rise and go up, then we have the fire element. And then as the fire element begins to dwindle away, we have the water element. And then at night, at midnight, when it's dark and it's like the most slow, we have the earth element. So just beginning to see this reflection in everything in life, and it can be really, really, really helpful and give us a context to live by. So some missing energetics, especially when it comes to plant medicine, right? Oh, let me take a step back. So also with plant medicines, it's just like the flavors of things. This is a really easy way to tune into it. When you're eating your food, just taste, like, does this taste earthy? Does this taste watery? Does this taste, how does it taste? And how does watery taste? So watery could taste like thick, oily, and like has like a demulcent, like lubricating quality in the mouth. So just being mindful, like, what does this taste like? And just going on your exploration so that you can understand and embody what it feels like. So the missing energetics, and the missing energetics are tension and relaxation. So just being mindful, right? We have hot, cold, wet, dry, and that's 4 things. But the 2 things that are missing from that is tension versus relaxation. So just in reflection, when we're thinking about plants, or for that matter, seasons, or there's so many, even planets, we thinking about temperature. So is it hot or is it cold? We're thinking about moisture. So is it wet or is it dry? And then we're thinking about tone, right? And here you can see the tone, like somebody's back is like tightening up, or is it like loose and open? So, yeah. Another thing I want to talk about is maintenance and your health. So these are the 3 things that you can do with your health. You can be reactive in it, which is when we wait for something to go wrong in our health before we address it. We can be preventative, which is just like trying to work on something before it occurs, which this is amazing when like using astrology, like the preventative capacity of astrology is just, it's so amazing. And I really feel like we could tune into it more if we begin to get out of the model of the mode of thinking that we're in, whereas, oh, everything's okay with me till everything's not okay with me. We have to be mindful of that. And then predictive maintenance, that also can be really, really helpful when it comes to astrology as well. Like looking forward and trying to see when something might happen so that we can avoid it as well. So we're coming to the houses now, and I wanted to just say something really quick about the idea of the houses in these specifics right here, like where it says week, 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 right? I want to talk about that because there's somebody on Twitter that I saw put like this up before, just talking about like the actual vision of a human being, and how you can see right here this red dotted line in astrology. There's something called being in aversion, right? Being in aversion is it's literally like a blind spot that you have. And it's just beautiful because the first house would represent the self. And then we look out and we can see straight ahead of us, but there's these blind spots right here, right? And then also I can't see what's right here going on in my peripheral vision that far because they're right next to me. So these would be considered blind spots as well. And something about blind spots is they're called weak at times, and that can be useful in certain forms of astrology, right? Like Hori astrology, it might be really, really good to know that. However, in natal astrology, I'm just inviting everyone to tune into the word subtle. The word subtle. Because a lot of times, even in the society that we're conditioned in, we don't appreciate subtle things or things that are finesse oriented or things that we have to close our eyes and feel into instead of seeing it directly. So just being mindful when I'm going to talk about these specific houses, because they will be houses that seem to be problematic, is just because they're blind spots and they're things that we can't necessarily see. However, we can feel into what's going on subtly in the background if we have that information and knowledge to do so. So the houses of health. The first house is somebody's constitution, right? It's like how I am built, my physical body. The sixth house is my day-to-day actions. What am I doing day to day that's creating my health or depleting my health? The eighth house is considered to be the house of death. And I put compost because the things that go to compost, right? They're kind of dead things, but they're rejuvenating things. So the eighth house can be utilized in that way as well, right? In specific contexts, especially when it comes to health. I've seen so many people within the last few years who have had highlighted eighth house transits, or even eighth house timing techniques where the eighth house is highlighted as well, and having them go through like a detoxification process and getting rid of essentially the death that's inside of them in their colons, right? Has been amazing and beautiful. And I'm so excited to bring that work more forward later. And then the 12th house being the house of mental health. And also, I want to consider the second house, even though oftentimes people don't talk about it as the house of health. I feel like in the society that we're in right now, a lot of times when it comes to the second house, we're not actually getting the things that we need. We're not getting the nourishment that we need, and we're not putting the right things into our mouths or really into our system in general. Like, what are we bringing in for nourishment? If we don't see what we're bringing in for nourishment, then all these other houses will be affected by it inherently. So just being mindful of the second house. So finally getting to the houses themselves. So the first house is also considered the ascendant, and it's considered the rising sign. And I think of the rising sign as the self, but also just presence in your immediate environment, right? Even if you look at this picture right here, it's like, this is first person, right? This is the thing that represents me the most in the chart in certain forms of astrology, right? It's me, and I can see what I'm doing. So it's first person, it's my immediate environment. And also that's why I say it's like the rising sign, because in every single moment, life is rising out of us. It's just naturally coming out of us. It's an emergent process. So just being mindful when it comes to the self, right? What do we need to know when it comes to the self? Do you feel comfortable in your present environment, right? What's arising out of me? What is emergent? And am I allowing myself to have an emergent process? Because if I'm not allowing myself to have an emergent process, oftentimes I'm in some state of fear or thinking too much about the future, which causes me to be stimulated excessively, and it can affect our adrenals, right? So the first house also rules the adrenal glands. And again, the first house being about the constitution. So it's about how someone is built. In traditional astrology, they consider the first house to be the helm. Again, it's like in every single moment, I'm steering the wheel of my life, right? That's the way I think about it. And also the first house is the joy of Mercury. And I think it's just a really beautiful reflection that this house is the joy of Mercury, because in every single present moment in my immediate environment, my first thing that I almost always do, and if I don't do it and I realize I'm not doing it, I do it more, is I just take a deep breath. And that brings joy to the first house, because Mercury is the breath. And we have to have that in every single moment if we're going to attune to even figuring out what the self is, if we're going to allow the present moment to arise out of us in a way that feels healthy for us. And the part of the body that the first house rules is the head. So we're going to talk a little bit about finding the constitution within the natal chart. So like I was saying, the helm is about like what we're steering, right? We're steering our lives with our physical body. So that's the helm, right? Even when you think of a boat, right? The steer, like we're steering it, and then the whole boat is moving. And that's us in our physical body in the first house. And there's a concept called Prakruti and Vikrooty in Ayurvedic medicine. And this is something that I feel is really, really important, and just inviting everybody to feel into it and think about it, because Prakruti, what that is, the way that I understand it is that it's our essential nature, right? It's like how we came here, and what was our body type, what was our temperament, just what were we when we first got here, what is our essence. And then the Vikruti could be called like what happened, what's going on now, or how has life happened and played out in ways that have changed you, or the adjustments that you've made over your life and what's going on right now. Because if you don't understand the baseline vital force of somebody, then oftentimes there can be problems. That's all I'm gonna say. So just being mindful of that is just something to think about. And when it comes to, okay, so constitution considerations, this is something really, 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 really important to feel into and think about, especially in our space and time where there's a lot of judgment around bodies, you know? So these three body types right here, these are three body types. And just based off of someone's body type, oftentimes they'll have a tendency to go out of balance based off of what body type they are. So I tend to look at these as the three doshas in Ayurveda. So open invitation for people to go check that out, the three doshas. But just talking about it here, just in a really simple way, right? Like these people would be considered more like slender people. Let's just call them slender people. And slender people will have a tendency towards, right, wanting to be the people who like do juice fasts and let's say be spiritual and, you know, get very like liminal and very like maybe fairy-like. And those people are often needing more heaviness, more slowness, so that their constitution could stay grounded and comfortable and rooted. The second type of person would be more like a muscular type, more like leader type of person, the type A type of person. You can hear it in my voice, I'm starting to get off, you know, that kind of thing, right? So that person might want to drink a bunch of coffee and work out more and do a bunch of stuff and be the person who's ambitious and be a motivational speaker and blah, 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 you know. And those people, sometimes they need to put down the coffee and drink some chamomile tea and whisper a little bit and just like be calm and go take like a bath and just take like a walk in nature, right? So just being mindful that these things are just like how they go out of balance. And then this one right here, this body type is a more substantial body type, right? Where this body type is probably needing more, it's not probably, honestly, it's just like it would be ideal for them to bring in more heat, more movement, right? More like movement practices, exercise, not sleeping in too late, things like that, because they'll tend towards eating heavy things and being slower in their metabolic force. So just being mindful of these body types and how if we learn and understand the body types, we can help get rid of the conditioning in our society of good or bad. And instead of good or bad, we can just actually have understanding and seek to be caring and loving to our earth, which is our body, and the earth in general. So that's really important. So finding the constitution and natal chart. First, we go to the ascendant. Then we look at if there's any planets in the ascendant in the first house. And then we look to the ruler of the first house. And I just put a bunch of different words right here. If you want to use different wording for the first house, it could be, so the ruler, or it could be the Lord. And I forgot to put the lady, the Lord or the lady of the house. These are just terminologies that people have used through time. The gatekeeper of the house. I forget who said that. I credit whoever said that. I didn't make that up. But also a steward of the house, right? So any of those words are really good. And if you come up with any words for the first house, open invitation to go into the comments below and type those in and let us know so that we can have a plethora of of lordship or gatekeepers or stewards of the houses. So when we're moving forward, we can be more inclusive in that way. So the plant for the first house. And so when it comes to the houses and herbs, I'm just thinking of it as like, what is that house and what would be beneficial for it? So for the present moment, not anybody and everybody, but milky oat seed is just a really, really, really useful, safe plant. And it helps with our nervous systems, right? It's a tropho-restorative, which just means it helps to restore and keep the nervous system calm over time. It's usually a cumulative remedy, whereas some plants, they kind of work like immediately, and not saying that it can't work immediately. However, with milky oat seeds, it's something that we take over time to nourish our nervous system and have ourselves like calm, right? And it's really, really safe. So it's like the person, the self, what is a plant that can help the self in a way? And I wanted to pick a plant that could do it in a very, very broad way for a large range of people. So milky oat seed, just amazing plants, amazing plant. So open invitation for people to tune into that. Yeah, so some other things about milky oat seed, the inability to keep your mind on any subject, right? That's something that we like. Oftentimes we have a lack of focus these days, and it's just allowing us to like be calm to where our nervous system doesn't scatter, right? And you know, there's people whose nervous system works differently than what is considered neurotypical. However, milky oat seed is still super helpful in any case, you know, just like it's calming to your nervous system, and that's what it's really about. And it works on all the 3 nerve plexuses. So what I mean by nerve plexuses is there's 3 main nerve plexuses. One's in the head, one's in the heart, and one's in the stomach. So maybe everybody just taking a deep breath. And feel into your body and recall what space in your body gets activated when you get nervous. Is it your stomach? Is it your heart? Is it your head? Is it your head, then your stomach? Is it your stomach into your heart? Just being mindful of those things, because if you desire to continue and learn about plant medicine, then those would be really important things. And it's a really clarifying question to ask people, and it helps us get away from allopathic thinking, right? Where it's like, oh, you have anxiety, take this herb for anxiety, right? Because now it's like, okay, you have anxiety, what kind of anxiety do you have? Is it of the head, heart, or stomach? And then we go forward from there. There's much more things to consider. However, I'm just trying to paint a picture here. So the second house is about the nourishment we take in. I feel like I have to go back. So going back to the first house again, right? Being present is really important. It's something that we don't do as much as necessary in our lives. So just being mindful, like just find presence always. Just keep finding presence so that you can show up for yourself and you don't like get head over heels and go too far too fast, because that is what makes our adrenal glands kind of tire out. And that's what will happen in the first house with our physical constitution, our vital force. We will essentially leak it by like not allowing the moment to arise and trying to like step over the moment's feet on some level. So just being mindful of that. The second house is about the nourishment we take in, right? It's ruling the throat. So that's what's happening, right? We put it in our mouth and it's going to our throat. And also the second house is about talent, right? And when we think about talent, it's about like my natural gifts, my inherent value. And then also talent, in old times, they used to call it, like they would say like 60 silver talents, right? It's just like how you pay for something, the amount of talent you have. Also in that way, it's about resources and it's about self-esteem, right? If we don't feel resourced, then oftentimes it's more difficult for us to feel really, really good and healthy and just like, yeah, good about ourselves. So just being mindful of the second house being, yeah, self-esteem, resources, and also perceived resources, right? Because sometimes in my experience, I have actually had all the tools and things that I needed, even if I didn't feel like, the feeling of it was not there and it wasn't present. Also, the second house has to do with the relationship with the five senses and the earth, right? And just like actually being in a body. Even in the first picture you saw, like it was just somebody acting in like life as it arises. But after life arises and we can like kind of come to some more stillness and just like feel into our bodies. And with the second house, oftentimes when it comes to herbs or holistic health in general, it's about, do I eat to nourish my body or from a perception of lack, right? And this goes back to resources. When we feel like we don't have the resources we need, sometimes we make choices that aren't as healthful for our body and for our being. And it's really important to be mindful of that. So that's also why I added the second house into the house of health, because just being able to feel into presence and being in my body, because we weren't taught to be in our bodies in this day and age. And it's really, really important that we come back to our earth and the earth. And also, just so everybody knows, the main resource on this planet is the planet Earth, right? So if you think about the second house and you think about money, then it's like, yes, money. And also, we live on planet Earth, and that's the greatest resource we'll ever had. And Earth has always held us, right? Also, that's something about the second house. It's about like feeling held, right? Whether I do or don't feel held. So really, really important there. If somebody tends to be an emotional eater, that's always a really good question to ask before going into eating. Because sometimes I have people in my practice like this, like, are you going to eat that thing? Okay, drop the judgment, eat that thing, So it all depends on what you have going on, but really feel into your body and just like actually get into your senses. Turn on some like light music, put on some clothes that feel really like nice on your skin. And then after that, make choices from that space of feeling like, oh, I'm resourced and I feel like I'm okay, before the act of going and acting on emotional eating. So that can always be really, really helpful. So with the second house and it being about being held and being nourished, I'm going to talk about herbs that are nutritives, right? It's a certain category of herbs. And herbs that are nutritive, they're mineral dense. Right? That's the first thing that I always look for in a nutritive. And they're plants that make us feel grounded, comfortable, and remind us of like safety and like everything's okay. Like everything is fine and I feel safe and everything's okay. I feel in my body and I feel nourished. Right? And another thing about nutritives, they're generally safe in larger amounts. What the larger amount is, I'm going to invite everybody to go check it out for themselves or reach out to a practitioner and figure that out. It's very simple for me, but different people have different perspectives. So I just want to leave that open and just invite people to tune in. Also, nutritives can be a plant that just like makes you feel really, really resourced. Like what's that plant that your mom used to give you when you were younger as tea that always just made you feel really, really good? And when it comes to nutritives, I tend to use them 2 or 3 times a week. And that's not even necessarily an invitation to do that. That's just my orientation. You'll have a different second house, right? So you'll have different needs. You'll have different things that make you feel nourished. So open invitation to go and tune into that. And also with nutritives, sometimes the certain plants that they're nutritive, like let's say chamomile. Chamomile is a nutritive plant. And even though it's nutritive, and a lot of times we think, oh, chamomile is so nice. With nutritives, I forgot to put this in a slide, but with nutritives, they should be allowed to steep for 4 hours. 4 hours. So the mineral properties can get into the tea, right? So 4 hours on the nutritives. So yeah, they can get kind of bitter sometimes. So just like if you want to add honey, if you want to add lemon, if you want to add different herbs, like to sprinkle in like some peppermint or something like that, or if there's a certain plant that might be more drying and you already kind of have a dryness to you, or you live out in the desert, then maybe you want to bring in, you can bring in honey, or you can bring in other herbs that are more moistening and cooling. So yeah. So just my favorite nutritive herbs to go down a list. My favorite nutritive herbs are nettle is A1 since day one. Horsetail is one. Chamomile, alfalfa. Alfalfa. Oh my gosh, alfalfa. Yeah, I love alfalfa so much. And then cleavers as well. So those are my favorite nutritives. So just open invitation for people to go tune in to that category of herbs more and see how you can resource yourself through plant medicine. Okay. Yeah. Okay, so the third house. So the third house represents our foundational education in general. However, in this context, we're talking about the foundational education about health, right? Like when you were growing up, what was your family talking about? What was your family saying about health? What was your neighbor like? Was there healthy food in your neighborhood? Things like that. The third house also is about communication. It's about siblings. It's about your local environment, which that's something I'm gonna really be talking about here in this talk. The third house is the house of the goddess, and it's in the moon's joy, right? And when I think of the house of the goddess, it's just about embodying things. It's always about embodying things. And also the third house represents semantic memory. And semantic memory essentially is just like facts and information and knowledge and data points, that type of memory. And so with the third house, I think a lot about like identifying plants in your local environment, right? That's how the plants go with that house, right? What's going on in your neighborhood? And where are the plants at in your neighborhood? Do you know? Maybe you do, maybe you don't. When it comes to the body, fine motor skill functioning has a lot to do with the third house, right? Thinking of it as like having this type of resonance or correspondence with the sign of Gemini and like motor skills functioning in like your hands and your arms, right? So that's the third house. And the part of the body, like I'm saying, is your arms, your forearms, your hands, and also your lungs. Right? So herbs for those things, and also local plants. For me, my reflection of the local plant that I've been spending a lot of time with is blackberry. Now, I'm not saying that blackberry goes in the third house. What I'm saying is it's the plant around me, in my local neighborhood, in my environment. So find yours. And also, if you find yours, let me know in the comments too. I always love hearing how people go on their explorations in nature and then come back and then integrate that into their lifetimes, to their life in general. So blackberry, for me, I always think about it's really cooling and it's high in fiber, right? The leaves are astringent, so the leaves are amazing for like making the stomach, like just toning the tissues of the stomach, right? Even we were talking about tension versus relaxation earlier. With blackberry leaves, it has this interesting quality of like toning the intestinal wall in the stomach, but also if I continue to drink it, most times it won't make it too tight. Now, if you do continuously drink it over and over again, of course you can go out of balance with any plant. However, it's really nice. It modulates a lot, right? It leans towards toning and tightening, but it modulates a lot. So this is one thing that I found astonishing about blackberry. It was used so commonly that back when herbs were like professional things, when professional doctors were using herbs, they discontinued using blackberry because so many people used it that they didn't even need to like work with it because everybody was using it so much. So also just being mindful of, the plants down the street that just like are just growing there and we're not paying attention to them. And they were just used so much back in the day, and bringing that back in is really, really important, right? And then also with it, you can make syrups and jams, and you can make it into like different things. And in this part of the plant, the root, the leaves, and the fruit are all used in this plant. And the root is used by decoction, which is essentially making a tea, but like having you boil some water, you put the herb in there and you let it like simmer a little bit for a while, right? 10 minutes to an hour is what I tend to do with decoctions, but everybody does different things. So, and then also the leaves, you drink that by infusion. So you're just making like a regular tea out of herbal tea out of the leaves as well. It says my local plant, and I'm gonna go see it after I'm done with this talk. So the fourth house is the home, the family. I consider it to be the lunar inner child, right? It's like how I feel inside myself. Do I feel comfortable enough to, come out of myself and express myself, right? It's the sense of belonging too, right? It's like even thinking about the sense of belonging is like, do I feel rooted? Do I feel planted here? And here can be anywhere. It can be like literally in my home as like a physical space. Like I'm in my apartment right now. Or it could be like, do I feel home? Like, do I feel at home on earth? Right? Because some people literally just like don't, people are like, I'm a starseed. Like they literally don't even identify with earth so much that they talk about being from different planets, and that's cool and stuff. I just want people to be mindful of what we can be doing when we don't feel like we belong here at times as a reflex. Also, the fourth house is reverence with household spirits, right? It's just like this local spirits around you, which is not necessarily like a spirit as a ghost, but like the spirit of the black raspberry, the blackberry plant, or the black raspberry plant too as well. Or I have sumac right down the street from me, and like the spirit that sumac holds, it's like that's part of my household. There's a lake down the street. What is the spirit of that lake, right? And how do I feel into that? And do I have a relationship with it? Oftentimes, when things happen when we're younger, if we don't feel like we're held or we belong in our family, oftentimes people, especially children, go out to nature and they make friends with nature because they inherently know that it's part of our family, right? So just being really mindful of that too. Also, the fourth house represents a reflection of our health at the end of life, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. And the part of the body that the fourth house rules is the chest, the stomach, and again, the fourth house being the root of things, the stomach is the root of our health, right? Whatever's going on in the stomach, the digestive tract as a whole, really, right? Whatever's going on there is the root of our health. Also, the fourth house will represent the way in which you were influenced by your family and how they ate. Like the third house is about like the food that was in your environment, like what your family friends ate, and stuff like that, and the way you were thinking about it. But in the fourth house, it's like, what were you like actually eating? Like what was being fed to you, right? From your family, not necessarily just what you were taking from the second house, but what your family was eating as a way to begin to cultivate your health. So with the fourth house in herbs, I think of like ancestral herbs, or herbs that come from the tradition that you're from, right? So one plant that I've been working with a lot lately is devil's claw, because it's just so perfect for the way that I'm set up. Really, that's why. So just think about, what your lineage is and what herbs have they used forever in that lineage, right? Every lineage has their plants, right? So, and devil's claw is specifically from Africa, and it's a bitter tonic. So for me, I have Sagittarius rising, and sometimes my liver can get a little bit stagnant, and the bitter flavor helps to relieve that and keep it flowing. It resets the digestion, devil's claw does, and it's a cholagogue, which helps with just excreting bile, right? There's cholagogue and there's choleretic, and those two things work on the bile in the liver and then also on the gallbladder. And the skeletal system, devil claw works on the skeletal system. Even you can see it has these little hooks here, right? So that's why they call it devil's claw. But when you drink devil's claw, if it fits with your constitution, it loosens the grip on the skeletal system, right? I have 6 planets in Capricorn, so I had a tendency towards being like very wound up tight in my body, right? And the devil's claw really helps loosen that grip. And then also I work with devil's claw for protection, right? And just like the lessons that devil's claw brings in that way. So the fifth house is about creativity and sexuality. It's about pleasure and play. It's about children and the creation of them. But it's also internally about the solar inner child. So it's about, do I feel like I can express myself, right? Can I get on stage and play out my drama, or like act out in a way, in a healthy way, right? And like share my creativity and my radiance. Also, the fifth house is about attention. So just being mindful if you have a lot of things in the fifth house, whether you feel like you get so much attention that it makes you feel not seen, or if you feel like you don't get attention at all, right? Those things are really important to tune into because it's a part of the functioning of your inner child, which is the solar inner child. So being able to feel seen and be seen by yourself and others is really important here. Generosity is really big in the fifth house too. So even talking about attention, if sometimes when people feel like they're not getting enough attention, they'll tend to be very, very generous or not generous at all because it needs to all be about them and they need to get their attention. So just being mindful of that too. The fifth house is where Venus joys, right? It's all about connection and pleasure, and that creates babies, right? So Venus there, very sensual space as well, fifth house. And the part of the body is the heart and also the spine, which has a co-rulership with Leo. So since we were talking about sensuality and sexuality and creativity as well, the plant Damiana I love Damiana for this here, right? Damiana is a relaxant plant, so it's very, very relaxing. And it helps with intimacy. So one of my teachers, he would always say like intimacy is like into me, you see. So it's allowing the other to be able to see into you in a way that's comfortable, that's like really connected, right? And Damiana is really, really helpful with that. It helps with like pelvic relaxation and circulation to the pelvis as well. So when we relax in that pelvic bowl, we can just like drop things and just like really be in connection and really, really be dropped in with each other and see into each other. Yeah. It also assists with digestion. It helps with social anxiety. It can also work on the 3 nerve plexuses that I was talking about earlier. So the stomach, the heart, and the head. And it also, I find that even though it is an aphrodisiac, it's very relaxing and calming in a way that just makes me want to feel creative and really playful. Damiana always gives me a sense of like being really playful. Also, I mentioned this too as well, that people smoke Damiana just in case people are like looking into alternatives to things that they're smoking now. It's just throwing it out there. Damiana, people smoke that or add it to like, you can add like lavender and roses and just, you know, even if you're trying to step away from like cigarettes or whatever you were doing before, if you want, or if you wanted to incorporate it in your practice, right? So the sixth house, I want to say first off, the sixth house you'll see oftentimes is considered the house of illness. So just being mindful of everything I'm going to say in this talk right here, because yeah, it can be the house of illness because like what I was saying earlier about the blind spots. However, it doesn't have to be that way because we are educated on what it is. Even if it still functions that way and things happen and the sixth house comes up and things just happen. However, we can be preventative about it, right? So the sixth house is also about like the day-to-day routines, my routines and also my rituals, right? So being really, really mindful, like what are the things that I do daily that are routine and how can I take that routine and make it a ritual, right? Like for instance, when I brush my teeth in the morning, I'm not only doing the routine of brushing my teeth, I'm doing the ritual of cleansing my mouth. So therefore, the things that I'm saying today will be clean. They'll come out properly. And if I do that day to day, right, the more and more I'm taking care of the health of my mouth overall, right? Also, the sixth house is the house of service. And also just asking the question in the sixth house, what is of service, right? Because oftentimes with things in the sixth house, it can be someone being of service so much that they overwork themselves, and them overworking themselves is what leads to them having illness, right? Or affecting their physical health. Also with the sixth house, it's about discernment and internalization. So you can also be called assimilation, right? So it's about what am I taking in from the outside world and internalizing that, right? What am I eating? And then also it's like, how is it processing in my body? And how is it either staying there or is it being discerned and cut out, right? And then also I think the sixth house is the application of the principles. So if you know things, it's like, how do I organize them in my life, right? We're talking about herbs now. So since we're talking about herbs, in the sixth house is how you're going to fit that into your day-to-day routine so that you won't lead yourself to overwork that will lead you to illness, right? In traditional astrology, in ancient times, they also used what they thought of it as like oracular means of healing. So going to like an oracle to figure out how to heal. And in these days and times, that oftentimes looks like alternative medicine practitioners. So let's think of like homeopathy, Ayurveda, traditional Chinese medicine, or classical Chinese medicine, or Nutritive, African spiritual healing. All those things really, really important in the sixth house as well. Oftentimes in the sixth house, there can be a difficulty in figuring out like how the illness came to be. So through oracular and alternative methods, oftentimes we can find things that we can't find in modern day medicine, And I'm not saying alternative and oracular healing as a negation to modern medicine, but as an addition, because oftentimes we don't have it added in. So invitation to bring it in more or to begin to consider it. So the sixth house is the joy of Mars. And I always think about this with the sixth house being perceived as a weak or a bad house and Mars' joy being there, and thinking about how the malefics always bring questions with them. And Mars in this instance is asking us, what do I need to sever ties from in order to be of service to myself, to better be in service of others? So this is going back to discernment, right? Like discerning what is of service, and then getting rid of something today, and then tomorrow getting rid of something tomorrow, and just like Mars joys in that experience. Just getting rid of all the little things that we know is not of service to me, because if it's not of service to me, then it's not of service to we, right? So we have to be really, really mindful of that. Even thinking about the sixth house, about to go into the seventh house and meeting the other, right? We have to get rid of the things that aren't of service to me so that I can move into the we in a way that is holistic and an orientation of right relationship. So the sixth house represents the digestive tract as a whole, and also what they call the mesentery system, which I'm not going to talk about that much. I'm not going to talk about that at all really right now, but I just wanted to say that because I haven't heard it and it's a thing. Also, in ancient times or in traditional astrology, it would say the intestines, right? It would say the sixth house rules the intestines. However, for me, it's the digestive tract as a whole, not only the digestive tract, but the way that the digestive tract is organized and feels like it's functioning, right? It's like in our digestive tract, the liver does this, it processes something, and then there's information that's like, hey, gallbladder, it's your turn, boom. And then it goes like the food or the bowel or whatever goes to the gallbladder or the whatever. I just sounded so professional there. But anyway, I don't want to complicate it. Just being mindful of that is the organization of the digestive tract is what I'm getting at, okay? So also the sixth house and just exploring it in a deeper way, right? Oftentimes the psychology within the sixth house can represent a feeling of being less than, and also having accumulation of learned guilt. So essentially it would be like guilt that was taught to us, that it's not even that it was just taught to us. This is the thing. We naturally act the way that we act when we're younger, right? And then somebody tells us, hey, this thing is wrong. So the way that we were acting, if it was told to us that it was wrong, then we will learn to feel guilty about a part of ourselves. And that the sixth house is where that energy tends to go oftentimes. And if we feel less than, or we have learned guilt around something that we do or who we are, then in our imagination and in our minds, in our thought patterning, we will think that something is wrong with me. And when we think that something is wrong with me, we begin to create psychosomatic issues in our body that can create illness. So the sixth house also can be imagination existing as the body, which is the psychosomatic experience of, I feel like something's wrong with me, and then the body receiving that information, right? Going back to talking about the sixth house being about the way, the information of the digestive tract, how we're processing things. It's not just the digestive tract of the stomach necessarily. It's the digestion of information, which goes throughout the whole body and is rooted in the digestive tract. So yeah, also being mindful that the sixth house is acute. And what I mean by it's acute, it's like day-to-day things, right? That's acute. So every day something's happening, something's happening, something's happening. That's acute. And then the 12th house is going to become chronic. And this concept right here is an amazing concept. It's called Kaladesapatra. And what that is just applying discernment, right? So there's a time, there's a place, and there's a circumstance occurring. If I'm working with somebody, the time right now is 2021. So I have to be mindful and have discernment around the space and time that we're in right now. The place, where's the person at? What culture are they in, right? That's the place. So if they're in the desert, I have to keep that in mind. If they're in the mountains, I have to keep that in mind. If they're in the tundra, I have to keep that in mind. And then the circumstance or lineage. So the lineage is just like, is it somebody who's African-American? Are they Caucasian? Are they Asian? You know, it's these different considerations of where someone comes from so that you can take those three things and be able to apply practices to their life that fit their reality. And also the current circumstance could be young person in the city, young person in the city who has not a lot of funds, right? So when I'm working with people and when it comes to herbs, like all these things are considered, right? A rich person who is lazy about how they deal with their health, and they've told me they're lazy about how they deal with their health. These are certain types of people, and all these things and circumstances need to be accounted for to be able to help with one's day-to-day routines. In this case, your day-to-day routine for yourself. So in the sixth house, the herbs that we work with are the herbs that we use for daily health. And the greatest formula that I've ever known for this is Triphala from the Ayurvedic lineage. And it's the top Ayurvedic formula ever, really. It's amazing. And it's considered to be tridoshic, which means it works on those three body types that we spoke of earlier, right? The slender person, the go-getter, energetic type of person, and then also the more stable, heavier set person. So it works with everyone, and the cleansing is gentle. So it's not like this hardcore detox, right? It's something that you can use every day. Now, how much you use, that might need to be adjusted. However, it's an herb that one can use long-standing period of time. And again, be mindful to go see your healthcare practitioner, because I'm just sharing the reflection of my experience and my practice with Triphala. So it also helps support healthy tissue function. So it is one of the, I might not say it's one of the only formulas. It is a very popular formula that is cleansing and restorative at the same time. Oftentimes when you're working with herbs, it's either cleansing or it's more restorative or building, whereas this one is both. Also, with herbs for daily health, go see a practitioner and see if you can get a custom formula that fits your day-to-day life, right? And that, because that custom formula could look like a tea that you drink in the morning, or it could look like a tincture that you're taking in the middle of the day when you have to make presentations and you start to get anxious, or it could be, you know, something you do at night before you go to sleep because your issue is that you feel like you have insomnia or you're experiencing sleepless nights or restless nights. So the seventh house. The seventh house is the house of partnership and relationship. I call it the house of mirrors because me is always we in my experience. And that's how I look at things, right? It's like the seventh house is about projections, right? How I'm projecting out into the world and what I'm receiving back from it, right? Which is the other. The other is showing me how I feel based off of their actions. And I also like that orientation because it allows me to take more responsibility and autonomy over what I'm doing and my responsibility for myself. So it's always a both and these are just orientations that I have, the approach that I have. Also, the seventh house could be the balance point, right? So if going back to the ascendant in the first house, if the first house in the ascendant is what's rising out of me in every moment, and I'm doing that, coming to the seventh house can give me a chance to have like a balance point. Or I can reflect with somebody and they can show me like, hey, I see you're doing this. You might want to change that up a little bit there, right? Also, the seventh house from a more medical perspective is the alkaline and acid balance within the body. And also with the seventh house, we want to ask ourselves, how does this relationship affect my health? And when I say this relationship, it could be your relationship with your romantic partner. It could be your relationship with your friend. It could be your relationship with your family. It could be your relationship with nature in and of itself. It could be your relationship with your laptop. It's just the other, right? And how are you in relationship with the other, right? So the seventh house from a medical perspective, the part of the body it rules is the kidney region, which the kidney region is the part that's going to determine the acid alkaline balance in your body as well. So in the seventh house, since it is about partnership and relationships, I was thinking about herbs to use during like social engagement, right? And I think chamomile is a great herb to use during social engagement because it's really calming. Even though, yeah, I have seen sometimes that a good, nice cup of chamomile can actually make somebody get kind of sleepy. So everybody's different. So just being mindful of that. However, in general, chamomile is just like even going to like different tea houses or coffee shops, oftentimes they'll have chamomile on the menu. So I just felt like it was a good broad spectrum herb that you can use when you're just hanging out with people, or if somebody's like, let's go get a coffee, but you're trying to like slow up on coffee. Maybe you'll go get a cup of chamomile instead and be able to still engage and feel comfortable and not feel like, oh my gosh, I want this coffee, all jittery about it. And also with chamomile, the flavor is easily modulated and changed. So it's always nice because, yeah, it's nice to just be out and like add like a little lemon or honey and like have something that tastes really good while you're enjoying the other or your friend or whatever you're enjoying. So the eighth house. The eighth house is the house of anxiety, fears that feel worse than death oftentimes, right? They say it's the house of death. And yeah, it's the house of death, but also one of my teachers, Michael A. Bryan, says it's the house of anxiety because it's what we fear worse than death, right? It's the feeling, it's not even like I'm going to die, but it's like if I don't have this thing or if this thing happens, I'm going to feel as if I'm dying. So just being mindful with the eighth house there. And like I was saying before, it is the house of composting, which is like the death that becomes a potential rebirth with the eighth house. So just knowing that is accessible to us more than I feel like was in any other space and time that we've had this tool of astrology. Also in the eighth house, I think of like detoxification versus constipation, right? Because when we're constipated, things are just sitting in our stomachs and they're rotting and they're dying, right? And we need to get rid of that. We need to let that go. So we need to detox that out, right? Also, the eighth house represents inheritances. So that can be genetic inheritances in which we have illnesses or disease that come from our lineage, right? It's what we inherited. We also can inherit money. We also can inherit emotions, right? So just being mindful of the eighth house and like what's in your eighth house and what do you feel like you inherited and how can you move through those things. And oftentimes in 2021, the people that I work with, what we've inherited, a lot of that is things that we want to process and detoxify and cleanse and not allow to become stagnant within our being. And oftentimes too, as well, the eighth house I consider to be like Phoenix consciousness, which going back to compost is like the death and rebirth of things. And also just being mindful when you're going through an eighth house experience, it can be so much depth and intensity to it. And I also just inviting people to just take this little golden nugget of the Phoenix does not know it's the Phoenix or it's becoming the Phoenix when it's being burned, right? I always tell my friends, like, everybody want to be a Phoenix, but don't nobody want to get burned, right? So sometimes that purification process has to happen. that death has to happen for the rebirth to come forth. And I'm not saying this as a way to skip over death, because death is a part of life. So it's necessary here, right? Because the 8th house is also about understanding impermanence and knowing how life is birth and death. It's not life and death. Anyway, I had to say that real quick. Also, the 8th house represents Kundalini, but I'm not going to talk about that right now. So the part of the body that the 8th house rules is the reproductive organs and the colon, right? It's the thing where does death go in our body? Our colon, right? We're getting rid of that. It's dying out, right? We processed it. Now it's time for it to go. And then the rebirth, not saying the reproductive system gets its energy from the colon, but it's like, but that's a reflection of like death and birth in the 8th house, right? The colon and then the reproductive organs. And in the 8th house, I chose to attune everybody to what is called alternative herbs. And alternative herbs is simply, they alter the metabolism in a way in which we can digest things more properly and eliminate them again, right? Even right here, I have the definition is to alter, right? It's alteration means metabolism and elimination, right? It's just altering a thing to get rid of it. So I eat something, it goes down, I alter it, right? I destroy it, and that destruction becomes creation in my body. Also, people used to call them blood purifiers. So blood, whenever you hear the word blood purifier, that just means a herb that's an alternative. And what that means is like, it's just removing toxins and humors from the lymph and the blood. And what it means by the humors is just like things that get caught up in the body, right? Those are the humors, the buildup of any element. So the excess buildup of earth, excess buildup of water, excess buildup of air, or excess buildup of fire. It's just removing those things from the lymph in the blood. And also back in the day, they used to call things impure blood or bad blood, or they would say it's humors in the blood. And what that would really just mean is there's a bunch of toxins, right? You know, in Ayurvedic medicine, they call it ama. It's undigested material that's just stuck in the body that needs to be let go of, right? And also being mindful is like what you ate in the 2nd house, in the 8th house, right? You've inherited what you put in your mouth. And you might want to get rid of it, because oftentimes when we eat stuff, when we ingest things, we have to get rid of things. That also is showing the impermanence of things. Things should not be in your body permanently. And if they are, that means death and decay is beginning to take a hold of our experience and existence. And that goes with emotions, that go with our physical body, that goes with our thoughts, everything. So the 9th house. The 9th house is considered to be the house of God in traditional astrology. That 9th house is about beliefs, vision of truth, worldview. I also like to feel into the 9th house as, it's vision of truth, but also like what I intuitively know to be true through natural law, right? Like in nature, I can go, as I continue to go out in nature, I allow it to be my teacher and show me what is life like just based off of nature being nature, period, right? And also the 9th house can be higher education. And in this case, we're talking about health. Like, have you gone and actually explored different ideas and different philosophies around healing and what is health? Because if you go into any like highlighted ninth house placements or time periods, it could just be a really helpful thing in the context of utilizing herbs or utilizing astrology in the houses in general when it comes to your health. So the 9th house also rules astrology and divination. The 9th house also rules episodic memory. So it's the memory that we have that we acquire through experience, right? Whereas semantic memory was like facts and information that we gathered, and episodic memory is our experiences of things. And we fuse those things together because God and the goddess are always together, always together. In episodic memory and semantic memory, they always belong together. It's a both and rather than this or that. And so the third house, we had fine motor skill functioning. And with the ninth house, we have gross motor skill functioning. So it's more about like the trunk of, I would think of it more as the ninth house is about like the trunk of my body. And then the third house is more about the fluid movement of like my limbs, right? And the part of the body the ninth house would rule, along with Sagittarius, is the hips, the thighs, the hamstrings, and the glutes. And then specifically these, I feel like, because what do you do with your beliefs? You pick your feet up and you go in that direction, right? It's the thing that's taking you where you're going. So yeah, it's always a good reflection. And the ninth house also being about higher education and also about teachers. And I just consider them to, like, for herbs, I consider it to be about wisdom remedies. So it's just herbs that have like this, they have this really strong guru quality to them, right? They're like really strong teacher plants. So the one that I have been working with a lot lately is sage, just sage officinalis. So just like what they would call regular sage, even though it's like far from just regular. But anyway, sage is a diaphoretic and a carminative. So it like helps us to sweat. And it also helps us digest food really well, which is what carminative means. Diaphoretic, it's helping us sweat and open up the pores, and carminative is helping us digest and process things. It also relieves sensation of dullness within the mind. So if someone feels like kind of like slow and tired and heavy, even just going to the local store and just buying sage and just chewing it, even though it's kind of strong sometimes for some people, but it's totally fine. It's like you chew on it and it just like actually begins to awaken your senses and gives you clarity. And the more clarity that you have, the more wisdom that you can access. And it also modulates creative energy. So if we're utilizing our energy too much, or if we're not using it at all, it just gives us that clarity of mind. And also it does it with our sexual energy as well, right? Like if I feel like I've been like excessively in my sexual desire, then it can make it calm down. Or if I feel like I haven't been in my sexual desires at all, it could help activate those things. So it modulates it. So I feel like that's one amazing thing. And that's even just speaking on that, like that wisdom that sage brings is so important, because it's like, if I get too far into creativity mode, I might need to slow down and feel into my mind so I can have clarity, so that I can have sustainable creativity. Versus when I'm like feeling slow and sluggish, and it gets me going so that I can utilize that creative force. And also just being mindful that it is said oftentimes it's a caution to not use sage for like over 3 weeks of time at a time. So just being mindful of that. And I don't mean when you're just like cooking with it, but if you're like drinking it as a tea and using like as a tincture, just being mindful of that. And obviously, again, going to your practitioner. Sage also removes stagnant clots, cysts, and it helps with amenorrhea. So it just allows the energy to keep moving and flowing, right? So when things get stuck and stagnant, bring in some sage, because right, it's opening the pores to relieve tension and tightness, and warming things up so things can air out and move. And it's also helping with digestion, right? So internally it's digesting things, and then externally it's letting things go and open and relieving you of those things. Yeah, love sage. Even just thinking about like if you call somebody a sage, right? That literally comes from the plant sage. So just this plant is just so full of wisdom and lessons, and it also is said to be used for children and elderly people in feeble states, right? Which is something I thought was really interesting. Not to say that people who are in good, healthy conditions can't use it or shouldn't use it. It's just like very specific for children or elderly people in these states of being. So yeah, sage, just such a beautiful plant. Just even using it as just like an essential oil in your practice, or yeah, just sage is just amazing. Cooking with it, oh, just can't say enough about sage. So the 10th house. The 10th house represents social norms, reputation, the work that we do out in the world in our career, or what a lot of people call career, but it can just be like what our work is out in the world, what we feel like we're responsible for in the world. That's what we do for a career, ideally speaking, from my perspective, right? The 10th house also is about being in your personal authorship, right? It's like, are you writing the story of your life, or are you allowing social norms to tell you and dictate what you're doing? Or are you allowing social norms to tell you what your career should be, right? Don't allow social norms to be your personal authority. Take back your personal authority and write the story of your own life, right? So that's the 10th house as well, especially from the perspective of the psyche. Also, the 10th house is what we reach when we rise, right? When we think about the rising sign, even if you think about the sun beginning to rise, once the sun gets to the 10th house, essentially every day, right? It's at the top of the chart. So it's like what we reach when we continue to rise up. And Dane Rujar would say that it's where it's essentially like the top of the mountain where the divine can give us the message. So 10th house issues when it comes to health represents health issues that come from like repression, right? Because we keep talking about here like reputation. So what our reputation is, or we feel like our reputation is, if we're worrying about social norms and like, how are they going to look at me? How are they going to look at me? We're not in our personal authority, and we're not in our personal authority. We're not in our integrity. We're not in our integrity. We're pushed in on ourselves, and that leads to repression. So just being mindful of like, if you have highlighted 10th house placements, and if you feel repression, because repression is like tension and tightness, right? Going back to the tone of the tissue is tightness. So you want to like relieve that so you can give yourself spaciousness. So the part of the body is the knees, the skin, and the skeletal system. And that's co-ruled with Capricorn. And even going back to like the sense of repression and thinking about how Capricorn energy oftentimes can lead to rigidity. So just seeing how those two things are connected, even when people have a tendency to say that they're not, which is fine, but it's not really true. Anyway, so herbs for work. And when I say work, it doesn't have to necessarily be like a 9 to 5 or anything like that. It's just like what you do out in the world, what you're doing in the middle of the day, what makes you feel creative, and what you feel responsible for in life, in your community. So herbs for work, this is just Camilla sensis. I always mess up that word. Anyway, so you could think of it as green tea, but it's not just green tea. It actually creates a variety of teas. So I put a few down here, right? You got white tea, you got green tea, you got yellow tea, oolong tea, black tea. There's also red tea and purple tea. And all those are just different processes of the same plant, and it makes it different. So just being mindful, sometimes people are like, oh, well, I don't want green tea because it has this much caffeine in it, or because sometimes it makes my stomach hurt. And I'm like, well, cool. There's a bunch of different types of tea. It's, maybe the most widely used plant on the whole planet, so and there's so much depth to tea. There's so much depth to it. So yeah, just making a practice out of that is so helpful for maintaining work-life balance in general for me, actually. Yeah, which going into that here, a practice to bring us into the moment and create from our center. So that's something that I find tea to be really amazing at. Specifically, one of my teachers tells me to drink tea out of a bowl or something that's bowl shaped, because it brings more nourishment when we drink out of things that are bowls rather than drinking out of a cup, right? He says cups are for hydration, bowls are for nourishment. So just like having tea in the middle of the day, or even starting our day with that, can just help us get centered, right? Really centered, so that we can focus in on what we need to do. Also, it does help with digestion, depending on what tea it is. It could be working digestion a lot for your body, or it could be not working digestion enough. So like I said, you're going to have to explore the different types of tea. There's a company called Global Tea Hut. I love that company. And then also a company called Living Tea. Both of those companies, highly recommend those for learning education about tea, and also like receiving like really great teas that are just different level. There's a different level. So everybody, I gotta say this too. The tea that you've been drinking just at a store or getting from the store, not to say that's bad, because I don't know what type of tea you're drinking, but oftentimes those teas are very low quality. So just being mindful, if tea makes you feel a certain way, invitation to go explore some like really nice teas and really get into it. Also, something about tea that is different than coffee, like when people are stepping away from coffee, oftentimes, they're like, well, tea still has caffeine in it. And I'm like, yeah, but it also has L-theanine and has other chemical constituents that actually modulate the caffeine. So it doesn't make us like excessively stimulated, right? It might make somebody stimulated depending on their constitution, right? Always keeping that in mind. And also, it's not the same. It's not, oh, this has coffee and this has caffeine, so they must be doing the same thing. It's not necessarily true. So taking a step back. Also, herbs for work, depending on what your job is, this is going to be a different tea for you, right? And not when I say tea, it's like herbal tea. So maybe what you do is you work at a restaurant and y'all have siestas, or what siestas are is y'all take breaks in the middle of the day and then y'all open back up later. Maybe you work both shifts sometimes. So after the first shift, maybe you want to drink something that's calming so you can take a nap, so you can wake up and feel rejuvenated for the second shift, right? So just being mindful of your own context always. So on to the 11th house. The 11th house is Jupiter's joy. It's the house of hope, dreams, and wishes, organizations, groups, like-minded people. It also, within psyche, within consciousness, it's about individuating from the consensus, right? So at the 10th house, it's like the social norms. And then at the 11th house, we build who we are based off of moving away from social norms, potentially, ideally, I would say moving away from social norms into our own individuality, right? And also learning what the social norms are, what I feel like I'm responsible for in the world, and taking that and building on it so that to create something for the community and humanity in and of itself. As far as health goes, the 11th house can be a place where groupthink affects us. So if everybody's thinking a certain way, then that might be affecting us in our health, right? Simple things like the food pyramid, right? In groupthink, the food pyramid was just perfect back in whatever times it was there, like in the 60s when the food pyramid was there, or even when I was younger. I know there was a food pyramid, and that food pyramid that they used when I was younger growing up, that was part of groupthink. Now we're finding out that it's not so much the truth. So just being mindful of that. And then also how the internet and electronics affect our health. That'll be in the 11th house. So look to your 11th house, and if you have a lot of planets there, see if, like, when really big things happen in the collective, you get really affected by it, or if you're like online doom scrolling, and just know how that's affecting your health. So the part of the body that the 11th house rules, along with Aquarius, is the calves, the ankles, and the shins. In everybody, the shins are so important because oftentimes people just say the ankles and the calves, or especially like the calves for Aquarius in the 11th house, but the shins are so important. They're so important because if you can just feel into it, I'm going to put my foot up, right? So if you can just feel into your shins, sometimes we hold so much stress in our shins and we don't even know it. And the rest of our body is actually compensating for that. So got to be really mindful of that. So tip of the day, feel into your shins and make sure they don't have a bunch of hidden tension there. Also, taking a step back, the 11th house, they also call the 11th house the house of the good spirit, right? The house of the good spirit. So that's why this picture here, right? It's like being able to access our personal genius, and also, let's say, potentially, like, you can see it as the higher self, or some people call it the daimon, right? So all that with the 11th house. And I correspond that to like our herbal allies, right? It's like the herbs that like are really, really, really on our team, or the herbs that have really been like guiding lights for us in our lives. And my herbal ally that I chose is Gotu Kola. And I've been using Gotu Kola since I got out of college, which I don't know how long ago that was. It was a really long time now. And Gotu Kola so many times has just helped me contain and remain in integrity with my mind and my body, right? Coming from being a football player, it's just like Gotu Kola is an amazing restorative herb. Amazing. Helps me stay in mental and physical integrity, right? It also helps with meditation, like long bouts of meditation. So had a long-standing meditation practice. And my meditation practice isn't even always just like being still. Sometimes it's a moving meditation practice, which is also why Gotu Kola has been so amazing for me, because it helps with the structure of my body. So being able to move my body fluidly, and also with like concentration and focus of my mind, right? Just keeping that integrity. Gotu Kola has been one of my greatest friends in that way, honestly. It also works on the inner skin, the outer skin, and the digestive tract as a whole. Gotu Kola, great for digestion. I've used it for so many things. Not really against that. It also, in Ayurvedic medicine, they call it Brahmi. And it's one of the two plants that are called Brahmi. There's another plant called Bacopa monieri that's called Brahmi. And I just wanted to bring that up just in case anybody wants to go explore Gotu Kola and they see Brahmi, and then they see Brahmi and they see Bacopa monieri, and they're two different things, even though they're both called Brahmi. And actually putting them together oftentimes is an amazing thing to do. And when I say oftentimes, I always love doing it. I'm really just saying words with caution. Also, Gotu Kola is rich in mineral content, especially in what's called a spagyric form. If you want to know about spagyrics, just reach out to me, or you can go check out my teacher, Sage Apopam, at the School of Evolutionary Herbalism, where he makes spagyrics. And also, I've found Gotu Kola, I've done a lot of meditating practices with Gotu Kola, to the point where when I first started practicing herbalism, I would go in my bathroom, put in headphones, and turn the lights off and just drink Gotu Kola every day, right? Especially every night after I got off work, of just working with so many people, just to like reorient my body, restructure, reorganize my body, reorganize and structure my mind, and just be like in integrity and like have the structure of what really is mind overall, right? When I think of mind, I don't think of it as in my head. I think of mind being all around me, in the information that is around me and processing, in order for me to think and where my thoughts are going and like organize everything, right? Which is physical, emotional, mental. Mind encompasses all those things for me, but it is centered in the heart. So the 12th house, another house of health. The 12th house is Saturn's joy, right? And again, talking about the malefics and the questions that they ask. In the 12th house, Saturn asks, what boundaries are needed to continue to give without being self-sacrificing? Big question there, right? Because Saturn, the energy of Saturn is withholding energy, right? And oftentimes planets in the 12th house need to learn how to withhold, so that they don't self-sacrifice, and have boundaries so that they don't spill out energetically, right? The 12th house is also the place of letting go. So even how I was talking about, we want to like contain so we don't spill out. Sometimes we do need to spill out, especially when it comes to holding on to information that is not useful for us, right? Even thinking about the 12th house connecting to the first house. The 12th house in relationship to the first house is the energy that is letting go. It's letting go from the first house. So who I think I am as Cameron, oftentimes I go to the 12th house to just let that go. Let that experience of myself go. And also it's the hidden place. So parts of myself that I don't necessarily see, like the unconscious things in the background that are going on, those are the things that I need to let go of, right? And oftentimes too, the 12th house, they call it the place of self-undoing. Well, it can be the self-undoing in two ways. It can be where like I go to the 12th house and I'm like, my self-undoing, like I do things to sabotage myself and things are happening and I'm becoming unraveled. And it also can be a place that we go to consciously in order to undo the way that we perceive ourselves and the way that we unconsciously project onto reality, in order to be able to let things go and exist as things just are. Because sometimes we're holding on too tight. We need to undo ourselves to allow the experience of life to be what it is. And sometimes that can be overwhelming and bigger than us. However, it's just something to be mindful of. Also, the 12th house represents prisons, hospitals, monasteries, also places of isolation and retreat. And places of isolation and retreat can be positive and negative, right? So we can feel isolated, and that can be like, yeah, it could make us feel really, really alone, right? And it can make us even not want to be in connection with other people and retreat into ourselves. Or we can be in isolation because, like I was saying with the 12th house, and like oftentimes we need boundaries. If we don't create boundaries, then we need to go into retreat and isolate from the world because we've been giving so much, we've been self-sacrificing, and we can no longer do that. So we have to retreat and go into isolation for a bit of time. So just being mindful of the spectrum of possibility with the idea of isolation and retreat, because it can be really, really helpful and it can be really, really unhealthy. So yeah. Also, the 12th house can represent spiritual discipline. Oftentimes when we come to places in our life where things feel like and seem like they're out of our control, that's when the spiritual disciplines actually come in the most handy, right? Oftentimes people, I feel like instead of doing spiritual discipline, sometimes people are like, well, I just let myself feel it because I don't want to spiritually bypass. Look, everybody, I'm here to tell you, there's no such thing as spiritual bypassing. If something is in your spirit, in your life, to transform you or to teach you something, you cannot bypass it. It will be here. You can put that in your unconscious and put it in the hidden place and act like it's not there, but you will never bypass it. It will just be present in the background. And if it's present in your background and you're not dealing with it, then one day it can become your undoing if you don't undo yourself. So just be mindful of that. Yeah, because spiritual practices are really, really helpful in those times, right? We have to just let go. And, you know, in church growing up, they would say, let go and let God, right? You just got to let life be what it is sometimes. And that's okay. And in the 12th house also, it's really important to be mindful. Sometimes it's okay to not know. Because if you know you don't know, then now you know. So yeah. The 12th house can also represent spiritual or hidden illnesses. And what that means to me, I'll oftentimes like something going on in the 12th house, like a long-term transit, and somebody finds out like there's mold, they've been exposed to mold, right? Or there's environmental toxins around them that like they didn't even see what's happening. Or I've even worked with a few people where during their 12th house transit, things were going on, and we found out it was like a mercury filling that they got when they were younger that was causing their illness, and we could never figure out what was going on at first. So the part of the body that the 12th house rules, along with Pisces, is the feet and the toes, which is also important. If you ever have things going on and you feel like you're coming undone, go to your feet, go to your toes, put them on the ground, give yourself a foot massage. It's just such a really, really grounding practice, right? To just be in your feet. And it helps be in your body too, especially if you're the thinking type. If you think a lot, you know, just coming in and rubbing on your feet, it just helps you drop in easier. So more about the 12th house. With the 12th house, in my practice, I've seen a lot of things occur in which like there's prenatal considerations with the 12th house. And what I mean by prenatal considerations is like what experience was occurring when you were in the womb, right? Like what was happening when you were in the womb. So maybe asking your mom, yeah, how was her experience when you were in the womb? And sometimes those experiences come with us in this life, and they have effects on us in ways that are hidden, right? That we don't understand because they're in the background. And they happened when we were in the womb, literally, right? And also the 12th house is about collective attunement. So sometimes people in the 12th with a lot of energies in the 12th house, especially the luminaries, they can experience things so overwhelmingly large. Like, and what I mean by that is the collective energy, they just feel it and it can overwhelm them. So if you feel that way, be mindful of that. And sometimes like wearing things on your head or taking spiritual baths can be really, really helpful there. And that also can be a thing that you do in the 12th house when you're going through long-term transit. Start taking baths and putting herbs in your baths with the 12th house. So again, going to boundaries and confusion. Sometimes people with a lot of energy in 12th house can feel confused because there's a lot going on and they don't understand that they're picking up on collective influences. And those collective influences can be environmental toxins. right? Or the environmental toxins can literally be like fabuloso or like cleaning products that have chemicals in them that are actually damaging. Or if I work at a restaurant that uses chemicals that I'm sensitive to and I don't even know it, I could be I could be poisoning myself essentially day to day, like through the environmental toxins and then overwhelming my body with that, right? And also with the 12th house, autoimmune conditions oftentimes occur here. In autoimmune conditions, I feel like oftentimes that is something that happens in which the immune system gets confused, right? So the 12th house being about confusion, and then autoimmunity also being about confusion, and it like attacking our own body because it has a confusion between self and other. So even sometimes with autoimmune conditions, being mindful if you experience any autoimmune things, just being mindful of that aspect of yourself. Like, how are my boundaries? And do I know the difference between this and that? Because your immune system internally is experiencing things that way. And the inside is a reflection of the outside correspondence from my perspective. Always, 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 right? And just being mindful that never bring blame, shame, or guilt into that process. And just understand that that's not where I'm coming from when I say things about like the autoimmunity. And if you have it, then check in with your boundaries. It's just something that I've seen as a pattern and I'm inviting people to tune into. So also with the 12th house is chronic things. So what happens in the 6th house day to day accumulates and goes to the 12th house. So the acute becomes chronic in that way. And plants in the 12th house, the plants that I like to attune to is entheogenic plants, right? So entheogenic plants essentially are plants that are psychoactive. And it's really, and just the plant that I wanted to explore a little bit and talk about is cannabis, right? Because it's becoming so popular these days, and just a beautiful reflection of the 12th house of how I've known people to go have experiences of the 12th house, and it's been like essentially like the undoing of themselves and the unraveling of themselves in order to see some like, or to taste enlightenment on some level, or taste an experience that was like overwhelming, that was just like full of like love and understanding of the interconnectivity of reality. And that's an overwhelming feeling, but it's a beautiful one, right? In other cases, the overwhelming feeling of like uncomfortability and paranoia, right? And cannabis can be the same way, or psychoactive plants in general can be the same way. So just being mindful of that if you have a tendency towards feeling overwhelmed, and just understanding how cannabis works with you or with any plant that is entheogenic, right? And also the illusory potential of cannabis, right? Like the hidden things that it can show us, like the illusory potential of it can be showing us our illusions, and also it can be illusions as in like make a feeling of like I start like in the past when I smoked cannabis, I oftentimes would get like paranoid. I would get paranoia and like think the cops were after me. I'm gonna talk black man, so they could have been after me too. Anyway, you know, it would heighten that though, and it also did actually help me unravel that. It helped me unravel that conditioning that I had around the cops are after me, even though I have to be very mindful based off of who I am. I also took that to an irrational level and allowed it to overwhelm me, and that affected my health a lot. So just things like that, I just invite people to be really, really mindful of, and also be mindful of the dose, right? Dose dependency, really important there. That could be the difference between being able to take off layers and then becoming overwhelmed and feeling uncomfortable. And also being mindful of different forms of ingestion, because with cannabis, it seems like a lot of people like to smoke it. However, it's not the best form of ingestion for everybody. You know, just smoking over time is just harsh on your lungs, right? In general. So just be mindful of that, because we're talking about the 12th house, and the 12th house is things that are chronic, right? And also talking about cannabis in the blood. And when I'm saying the blood here, I mean the actual like blood circulation, but also I'm talking about the lymph, and how sometimes when people smoke cannabis excessively, they unknowingly are stagnating their lymphatic system in their blood in their body, because of how smoking, like even if you just think of something that heats up and like gets sticky on the edges of things, like if you've ever put like sweet potatoes in a pan in the oven, and like how it gets sticky and sticks onto the sides of the pan, that kind of thing, right? That's what cannabis can do if we smoke in excess and not be mindful of it. So just being mindful of that around cannabis, because it can be a great thing and it also can be not such a great thing. And we have to be mindful of what the plant is rather than what I think it's good for. And also being mindful with entheogenic plants of just like the safety and talking to a practitioner who knows how to work with these plants and using them responsibly. And being mindful if you have a lot of 12th house stuff going on, how that might influence you more. You might be like, I don't know why this influences me that way. You got a lot of 12th house stuff. Sometimes it happens, right? I'm not saying it's going to always overwhelm you in a negative way. However, just be mindful. We're all made up differently. So I want to talk a second about the astrological houses and age, because I thought this is a really cool concept of, just going around the wheel and like thinking about our health. So here at the ascendant, right, I just think of this literally as just the day, right? It's like the sun is rising, and we can think of this as going up, and like we're growing up, we start to get older, and then we begin to descend down. So it's just like thinking about our health throughout our life and how we can track it, right? How we can track our health throughout our life through this chart, right? And also sometimes there's other perspectives where you can go the other way, and there's like the formation of the self, and then you come to the end of life. So just being mindful, this is just one perspective, and there's multiple other perspectives, but I just think this is a really cool way of looking at it, because it also is a way to follow the day. So like at sunrise, you do a certain thing, you get to the summertime where the sun is at its peak, and then it begins to fall. You go to autumn, or what we call dusk, right? So just thinking of the day in that way. We got high noon here, we got dusk here, and our life goes in that process too as well. And then here at the bottom, we go into the deepest part of it, which is like night, and it also is like old age. And then in old age, we like give away and we like let go of being here on this planet, essentially. So yeah, so invitation for application of all the things that we talked about today. I know this was probably a lot of information for you, so I hope that you took your time with it and also just thought about it in a really, really practical sense. Even if it's new information, a lot of these things are things that can be applied really quickly. So just open invitation to pull out your chart and just think about, how does this apply to you, and what does this reveal in your chart? Like, is there a way that you can use herbs in like while you go out and work? Or is there a way that you can, if you're going to have a difficult conversation with somebody, you can make some tea and have some tea with them before you go into that conversation, things like that. And always acting in accordance to the light of nature. And what I mean by that is just following the cycles of nature, right? Just following the cycles of nature. Even following the cycles of nature could be the way that you're using your astrological chart in order to bring out your greatest expression through finding herbs that work for you in every single house. Especially when it comes to that local environment one, that one can be really, really important, especially in these times with Uranus and Taurus. And also play with curiosity, right? Like being open to figuring out what works for you, not necessarily having to be rigid about the process of figuring it out, just going out there and being curious, because at the end of the day, that's how we actually learn in life anyway. So just be mindful of that. So some resources that I used during this talk. First of all, Carol Allen, that's literally my mother, because she taught me how to think, not what to think. And I think that's really, really important in these days and times. And I want you to be mindful of everything, all the information that I gave out and you received today. Just, learn how to think about it, not learn what to think by what I say. It's just reflections. Countless elders in the local community. There's just been so many people that have helped me along my way. Sage Popham over at the School of Evolutionary Herbalism was the first herbal teacher directly I learned from. Judith Hill and Kira Sutherland, 2 medical astrologers. You already saw Kira in a talk earlier this week. So just 2 great medical astrologers that I've learned from. An astrologer named Ever Reese, he's taught me a lot and helped me learn how to, what he calls spin the wheel, right? And he calls it opening the lotus. So it's just like understanding any and every any and every concept in reality based off of astrology. So without him, I really feel like I would not have had this concept come up in my psyche to share with y'all today. So I appreciate you for everything you've ever taught me and conveyed to me, because yeah, great astrologer there. Also, Jeffrey Wolf Green and Mark Jones and everyone else that I've learned from over at the School of Evolutionary, Evolutionary Astrology, the School of Evolutionary Astrology. And then Matthew Wood, he's an herbalist. Prasanti Dejagar, he's an herbalist, a yogi, a Jyotisha astrologer as well. And then also Demetria George, because a lot of the things about the houses, I took a class with Demetria George over the spiritual meanings of the traditional houses. And it really, really helped me connect some things that I already was experiencing in my life and plug them in with more just mundane astrological significations of the houses. So where to find me? I have a website. You can find me at www.cadreamplanet.com. On Instagram, you can find me at cadream6. On Twitter, you can find me at cadream7. And there's my email. And just know that I do have a sliding scale. So if you ever want to get a reading or want to work with me long term, it's a sliding scale experience. So it's something that you would have to reach out to me on, and we'll figure that out together based off what you have going on. So yeah, I thank you everybody for being here with me. And if you have any questions, just let me know in the comments below, and I'll be sure to come back around and check it out. So yeah, thanks for being here with me today, and everybody stay blessed. Peace.